Okay, so we're in, where are we? We're in, at this point here. Let's see, yeah. So week 9, and we're going to talk about naive Bayes this week. This week is the last week of assessed lab class. So there's lab classes every other week. There's 2 more lab classes, but they're not assessed, right? Is that right? Or was the last week of the assessed? No, last week would have been. What we've got today is yeah, last week would be the last week of the assessed lab class. We're going to talk about classification. So classification. Hello. So classification is sort of probably what machine learning is most famous for doing. And we're going to look at a specific method, a method that's very easy to implement. So I'm going to describe it from the context of probabilistic modeling. But actually, it's quite a lot easier to implement it than it is to describe. It's called naive Bayes. And one thing about it is it can operate on very, very large data sets very easy. Because it turns out it treats each feature of the data set independently, and it's very often easy to fit the necessary conditional distributions. I'm going to wipe off these graphs because they're clearly dollars versus skills. Not a good graph. That can't be a good thing. That looks like it's from economics or something like that. So I don't want you being distracted by graphs that are impressionistic. Source country. Return to skill in US, declining cost, yes. Classification is probably the area that machine learning started working on in the sort of early days. Quickest that was, it's not neglected by statistics because there's things like logistic regression that were well known in statistics, but it was where a lot of the early success was in machine learning. So last time we looked at unsupervised learning. This is a supervised learning technique, but the difference is that the labels we're interested in are discrete. So it's a bit like clustering, which we also looked at last time, but it's supervised clustering. You know the class that you expect things to be in. Now we're going to focus on binary classification. So the idea is we're given again a data set containing inputs and targets, just like in the regression case. In the regression case, we had some set of inputs x and some set of real valued targets y. So each data point consists of a vector x, which could also be a vector of features. Now, we'll not look at that till next time, and I'll only briefly mention it next time. But for the moment, we'll just assume it's x, or it could be phi, though, you know, sort of basis vectors. And then a class label y. So the label in this case is binary. So for binary classification, we're trying to tell whether something is in a class or if it's not in a class. And so, yeah, we can think of these input vectors as features. So an example might be we're trying to classify males versus females from height and weight, or height and length of hair, or height, length of hair, weight, whatever else. We could use those as features, and they may separate the data. So classification examples. Let me just pull out of that and fix the little error there, which I've just created. So classification examples. A really famous example is work done particularly by a guy called Jan LeCun, who's extremely well known today as well, for classifying handwritten digits from binary images. Sorry, that's really annoying, isn't it? It's not surprising that it's annoying because Apple computers are annoying. Let's see if I can get rid of what that's doing. Okay, thank you. All computers are annoying though, so that's not surprising that Apple computers are annoying. Okay, that's better. So in this case, what they were doing is they had envelopes coming in. This was for the US Postal Service, but it was a system built by AT&T, like back in the 90s. and they were finding out where the zip code was and then automatically reading the digits of the zip code so they could auto-sort the letters. This is a sort of 25-year-old application. It was considered pretty significant at the time. Now, one I remember, now on your digital cameras, I was around for this one. I was at a conference where, one of the conferences where this was presented. It was by some people, a guy called Paul Viola, and I can't remember, Jones is the surname of the second one. I don't know Jones, but I've met Paul Viola a few times. Detecting faces in images on your digital camera or on your phone, right? Now it has a box around the face. So I was at the conference when that was presented, and they had a video camera like that one set up at the poster, and people were walking past, and then they had this system showing that they were detecting your face as you walk past. We were flabbergasted. That was only like, 15 years ago, less. And it's just, within months even, that was on digital cameras, like that system. In that case, the real clever bit is how fast they do it. It's not the accuracy with which they're doing it, it's the speed with which they're doing it. Who a detected face belongs to? I used to really be very impressed with the Picasa system. Picasa is photo organization software. Has anyone used that? Just one. So it tells who your friends are and it collates them together. But actually, the game shifted to Facebook are now detecting faces. Who is in your images? They can detect that extremely well. So this for example, deep face is I know this guy Mark Aurelio and his collaborators. I don't know why that said cited only 4. This paper here, closing the gap to human level performance in face verification. This is a really interesting data set. Actually, they did a lot of pre-processing where the task is you're presented 2 faces. So this is Sylvester Stallone. Actually, they're showing the warping of the face, doing the face alignment. And you're asked to say whether or not they're the same person. So in theory, like this could be this classification. If we considered every person in this room, this is a multi-class classification. But in this data set, they turn it into something else. The task is to say whether or not 2 people are the same. Let's see if there's an alignment here. Here they're showing ROC curves. We haven't done ROC curves. Maybe I should do that in the course. In the ROC curve, you plot, as you change the threshold of the classification, you plot the false positive versus the true positive. And you want your curve to be as high up as possible in this corner. The black line is human. This is humans looking at cropped versions of the data set. So data where you've just cropped the face like that. You don't see the context. Humans are really good at taking in context. Like if it's Lady Gaga, you tend to, it's easier to recognize her if you see her whole head because she's wearing some extraordinary headdress. If you just see her face, maybe you don't even know, well, probably I can't tell what Lady Gaga looks like unless she's in a massive costume. So we're really good at that context. If you take that context away, this is human performance on this data set. I don't know, see, I try and be really contemporary, but probably Lady Gaga isn't contemporary anymore. That's probably, oh God, Lady Gaga, that's so old. Yeah, so okay, so the thing I like about this is this is a system that they use at Facebook. They don't use it in exactly this way. This describes the initial research system. I visited Facebook and they spent a lot of time talking about how you implement such a system at speed such that it can look at faces in real time. I'm not sure how often they're using it. It takes quite a lot of compute to do this sort of classification and how many people they consider as being in those faces. But it's kind of extraordinary the sort of accuracies they can achieve. What I'm even more excited about than deep face, though, is something called Gaussian face, because that's Facebook, massive company. They used billions of faces to train that system. Even cooler, this is a guy called Chao Lu, who's based at Hong Kong University, and he visited Sheffield last year. And he used a system based on a model that we designed in Sheffield called the GPLVM. That's why it's called Gaussian face, because the G stands for Gaussian. And he, in this paper, did face classification that surpassed human level performance. So it was the best at the time. I think someone's beaten it now. But here's the image pair. This is the idea in this case. So we try and zoom in on that. This is Chao Chao's got nicer diagrams as well as a nicer result. So Chao Chao it's showing the diagram of what goes on here. You've got two faces A and B, and you have to say whether or not they're the same person. So who thinks these people are the same person? No one. Who thinks they're different people? Yes. Yeah, they're different people, yeah, I think. And actually, a lot of this system is the feature extraction. This is like a big thing that's going on in machine learning now, is learning this feature extraction. And that's what was going on in deep face. So these deep networks are all trying to learn the feature extraction. They're complex basis function models, basically, from our perspective. Doing a lot of learning, processing each image, and then going into a vector together, which the Gaussian face model is now used. Now, this model here was the thing he based on the GPL VM, and he got... he didn't do all that complex pre-processing that Facebook did with the mapping the faces, twisting it around. He didn't do any of that. He just did affine transformations. And he got this incredible result on his... so these are samples of the sort of thing you're trying to deal with in the data. So this is... who knows who this is? It's Lady Gaga. No, it's not Lady Gaga. Anyone recognize that? I believe that's Gerhard Schroeder, who's the previous Chancellor of Germany. I don't recognize any of the others. Yeah, so these are pairs of people that are the same person. So, for example, the makeup here is quite different, isn't it? You know, that's... so some of them are quite tricky, and indeed the system will make errors. So I think he's got some examples of matched and mismatched pairs that were incorrectly classified. So so it didn't get these things right, but it's looking at the cropped face, so it's just looking at this. So these are the same person and didn't get that. These are different people, but it thought they were the same. Now, but this is the cool bit, is this performance, Gaussian face, it surpassed the human performance on this data set. And so actually this hit the news quite big because Facebook had just announced almost human level performance. And this guy working as a master's student in Hong Kong, he beat human level performance for the first time on this data set, just after Facebook had made a massive deal about this. Now he did it. How did he do it? How could he do it? We used, I think, much cleverer methods, because they're our methods. He used the best features of other people's methods as well. He used all these deep systems for pre-processing, but then he used our methods for the sort of latent variable methods that we designed for doing the final stage, combined with classification. He used way less data. I think he used like 100,000 data for training. It's in here. Facebook used billions. They like took their data set of billions of faces, whereas Chow Chow just used whatever data he could get hold of, but it was in the hundreds of thousands in the end. It had to be, because our algorithm can't scale to billions. It's the sort of thing we're working on at the moment. So that's a really impressive result, and he did that at master's level. So he's now a PhD student in Cambridge, I think, working with Zubin Garamani. So very impressive. So if you search for, I think he's like in Wired magazine and stuff like that. It's quite nice. Oh yeah, look, here he is in Italian. Il computer ci battono anche nel riconoscimento facciale. That handycam system, that one's the the original sort of system that Viola and Jones worked out, and that's much older because it's much easier to detect a face than recognize a face, right? So here he said, "Questa almeno è quanto affermano Chow Chow Liu e Zhao, how do I spell it? Zhao Tang, yeah, due ricercatori dell'Università Cinese di Hong Kong." There you go. You can hit worldwide news with if you do such data sets. They're considered very ecco una delle coppie di foto riconosciuto da Gaussian face. I thought that was one that it wasn't recognizing. Oh no, maybe it was recognizing. Okay. So it's actually quite a big deal doing this classification. It's where we've seen a lot of the success in recent times. Now, we're not going to teach exactly how that's being done, but you're seeing a lot of the principles that lets you to do that, right? You should be able to, we could do a thing on Chow Chow's paper, and we could see the aspects that we've put together. the sort of complex basis function extraction that's deep modeling, latent variable models, nonlinear latent variable models, which you haven't done for doing the classification. So that's a really big application, and it's sort of in the news because it's something that people in the news can grab on. Oh, recognizing faces. Computers can do it better than humans now. They can't really. They can for that particular data set for the cropped version. Classifying a type of cancer given gene expression data. So this is a sort of thing. So that's one that humans are quite good at, but this is something that humans aren't good at. So gene expression data is like in a cell is made up of DNA. But that's actually not the functioning part of the cell. The functioning part of the cell is the building blocks, the proteins. So the DNA is like the stored code of how to construct things. And then there's an enormous complex system about which things to switch on. And then you switch DNA to RNA, and RNA goes to protein. So protein is like 3D structures, micro machines operating in the cell. Now, so the DNA is the same in every cell, but the RNA that's being expressed in any given cell is different according to what the cell's doing. So one thing people are interested in is looking at which RNAs are being produced in this things called gene expression experiments, so you look at 30,000 different RNAs and see how many of them are in the cell. And then you try and use that to categorize different type of cancer so you can understand treatment. This turns out to be much harder than people expected. So people thought, oh great, now we'll be able to characterize cancer and do treatment. Why is it hard? Because actually a cancer is not a single cell type. You get a mutation in a cell type that is the initial critical mutation, and then you just get floods of mutations. So you have an entire sort of evolutionary tree of mutations in the cancer. So what you see in terms of gene expression when you look at the tissue is not the result of any one mutation, just your cells go haywire. So it's quite the big sort of thing people are interested in. Now a lot of machine learning is involved in is trying to find what that source mutation is, what the dangerous mutations are. Some of these things can be cleaned up by the body, the immune system, but some other things are protective. And there's a lot of work on the interaction between the immune system. The immune system is just a really super complex pattern recognition system, a distributed intelligence across your body that's trying to recognize things that aren't part of you. And somehow cancer cells switched it off. So the cancer cell works out a way of fooling the immune system, and that's how it becomes a cancer. Most cells, if they become dangerous, are dealt with by the immune system. So there's a real lot of work now in trying to work out how the cells are doing that and reverse that process, because that would be like a single bullet cure for cancer, which is unlikely, but yeah, it would be amazing, wouldn't it? Categorization of document types. So document types in terms of if we're looking at the internet and we want to know different subjects of documents and what those subjects are. So a lot of work in machine learning and language processing. I mean, and there's a lot of tailored techniques that are specifically for language processing. Things like latent Dirichlet allocation, which is like a special clustering approach, a topic model they're called. A latent variable approach that tries to build words as the latent variables, build topic models there. Is the name. But before that, before topic models came in, people were really interested in just classification systems. So looking at the document, turning the document into features and seeing if this is a document that we're interested in retrieving. And people used simple classification approaches for that. Questions at that point? And probably successes in classification are typically the most famous things. I think, to me, certainly they're not the most interesting things in machine learning because, I don't know, well, for my research, I don't focus so much on classification because I like to build quite complex models, and often in classification you don't need super complex models. You need good feature extraction. Okay, so we're going to talk about so-called Bayes classifiers. So I just want to remind you something. When you say Bayes classifier, it doesn't mean it's Bayesian. So just a reminder from what we talked about, I think, week before last or week before that because of the reading week. So we're going to use Bayes' rule to invert probabilities. I don't even like the term Bayes' rule, right? I've said that before. It's just the product rule of probability. And we're going to use that. We use that in the Bayesian approach as well. But Bayesian is not named after Bayes' rule. Okay? That's very important to remember that. Bayesian is not named after Bayes' rule. Bayes' rule is just a mathematical relationship. If you don't believe in Bayes' rule, you don't believe in maths, okay? But it's possible to... Bayesian is about that epistemic versus aleatoric separation. So, and there is, it's feasible. That's a philosophical separation. So that's something we can argue about. You can't really argue about maths that's been proven, right? It's just there. It's the one thing you can't argue about. You can argue about scientific results. You can even argue about evolution if you like. If you do, I won't argue with you. I'll just say, okay, whatever. But it's possible to argue about it. Evolution is not proved in the same way maths is proved. So if you argue with Bayes' rule, you're sort of more stupid than people who argue with evolution. Okay, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with Bayes' rule. The term Bayesian refers to the treatment of parameters as stochastic variables. Now, when we use Bayes' rule now in Bayes' classifier, people would accept that the things we're treating are stochastic variables, the labels of the classification. Most people, even frequentists, would accept that they're stochastic, right? Because remember before what we said when we were looking at regression, we said y, our observation, is some mean function plus some noisy corruption. So people who understand what they're talking about would accept that the labels y are stochastic variables. And in Bayes classifiers that we're going to present now, we're just going to assume that. So this is actually a frequentist approach. It's not a Bayesian approach. That's a common confusion. Of course, Bayesian approaches, or use of Bayes' rule in this way, and Bayesian approaches were proposed by Laplace and Bayes. So Laplace didn't know about Bayes, and Laplace is much clearer and is applying it in practical problems. But we'll come to what Bayes said, which is why people call it Bayesian. The reason it was called Bayesian by someone called Ronald Fisher, who's a very famous statistician, and he was trying to use it as an insult. He was trying to say that's a Bayesian approach, as in it's a sect, it's some sort of weird approach. And the reason it's called Bayesian, I'll just sort of briefly review by introducing discrete probabilities. So the use of Bayes' rule does not imply you're being Bayesian. It's just it's just an application of the product rule of probability. So what we're going to do is to do the naive Bayes approach, which is not a Bayesian approach. We're going to build an algorithm that is based on modeling the joint distribution of y and x. So up until now, we've based all our algorithms on a prediction function and an objective function. So we basically formed a prediction function that we said is going from what we've given to what we want to see. In the unsupervised learning place, we say we're not even given what we want to know, so we're going to integrate over that. So that was a slightly different one, but we still had a prediction function and an objective function. Now, so far, the codomain, the output of the function, has been real numbers or real vectors when we've considered the prediction. Now, in classification, we're going to go from an input vector x to an associated label, which is 0 or 1 or -1 or 1. So the output is discrete. So in particular, next week, we're going to look at how we take f of x, and instead of being real valued, we go to a discrete value quite explicitly. But this week, what that means for us is we're going to, first of all, look at, I apologize for this, I don't quite know how to get, look, it's written nicely in my table, p of y, 1 minus pi, pi. You get the same problem in your notes as well. Look, for a moment there, look briefly at that. Oh! So these tables are a little bit awkward. So this is a probability distribution. So what I'm going to do is introduce this Bernoulli distribution, which is a discrete probability distribution, and it's the simplest thing ever. But mathematically, it looks like this. So we need to discrete classification. It's like turning someone to Cassie or something. OK, so what we need to do now, we've been working with real values up till now. We used real value probability distributions. We said we've got an f of x, and then we add some noise, which is Gaussian distributed, to get our stochastic y. But now to deal with discrete labels, we need a discrete probability distribution. So discrete probability distribution is much, much easier than a continuous in many respects. So this table tries to represent what's going on. We've got y can take on two values, 0 or 1, and the probability of y is either pi if the value is 1, or 1 minus pi if the value is 0. That's not very difficult, is it? So pi could be 0.2, 0.2 that it's 1, 0.8 that it's 0. So it's a discrete probability distribution. These must sum to 1. So that's how we might write it. So that's a table probability, the sort of thing you see, I don't know, even like junior high school or something, whatever grade you see it. But when we write it mathematically, it looks a little bit more complex. We use a very simple trick, which we use y as a mathematical switch. So instead of writing this as a table, because if you write this as a table, okay, you can take logs on this table, you can do all sorts of things. The log probability would be log of that, and then you could have another table depending on outcome, right? But this is a function of y, this probability distribution, in some sense. We're just showing it as a pointer function, like a discrete switch across y. But this is how we can write such a switch in one function. Because all this is saying is p of y is pi to the power of y times 1 minus pi to the power of 1 minus y. So this is just a neat mathematical switch, because if y is 1, y can only be 0 or 1. It can't be anything in between. That's the codomain. Or the domain. Should be the domain, actually. So pi to the y is either pi to the 0. What's pi to the 0? 1. Yeah, and pi to the 1 would be pi. Yeah. So if y is 0, this is 1 times 1 minus pi to the 1 minus 0. So it's 1 minus pi. If pi is 1, it's pi to the 1 times 1 minus pi to the 0. So it's pi. So all y is operating as is just a discrete mathematical switch between the two. And of course, it looks more complex than a simple table. Or of course, it looks much more complex than if we were to just write this in code. So this Bernoulli distribution is just saying, look at that. I haven't got yi as a function on the input. Yeah, this is because I never actually ran this code. So so this is if y subscript I, for some reason that dash is missing there. Is the dash missing, or have I written it incorrectly? Yeah, no, the dash is missing when it displays. If y subscript I is 1, return pi, else return 1 minus pi. Okay, it's not checking that it's 0. Maybe it should do some type checking on the input. That's what that function says. Yeah? So that's the Bernoulli distribution. It's called the Bernoulli distribution after a man called Jacob Bernoulli, who was a very early, I think Swiss? It's in the notes. I think he's Swiss mathematician. They did a lot of work on probability. And what Bernoulli described, when he was describing the Bernoulli distribution, he described the idea of an urn. And in his urn, and you'll hear this all the time, but I think we've got the sort of thing where he describes it in the notes. So an urn is just a complex word for a jar. Is it a complex word or a simple word? I don't know. It's only got 3 letters. Anyway, it's a less well used word for jar. And inside the urn, you've got some different balls, and they're either black or red. And he said, well, if you think about this, then the probability of pulling out a black ball will be equal to the number of black balls divided by the total number of balls. Yeah? Probability of red ball is 1 minus that. Okay? And that's how he described the probability distribution. Now this is interesting because the parameter of this distribution is the proportion of red balls to black balls. That's to total balls, sorry. That's the parameter, that's pi. So is this uncertainty associated with that parameter epistemic or aleatoric? Remember, epistemic was what color my socks were, or the result of a match once it's been played. Aleatoric is where the piece of paper falls on the ground, or the result of the match before it's been played. So is this epistemic or aleatoric? Epistemic, yeah. It's quite clearly epistemic, regardless of all my qualms about what's epistemic and what's aleatoric mean. Okay, so now Bayes, the reason they called this Bayesian is because Bayes also introduced this distribution, I think independently of Bernoulli. He didn't know about Bernoulli. Now Bayes introduced it in this way. He said, let's imagine a table, and you can think of it like a billiard table, a bar billiards. It's the sort of thing that they played with. Okay. The cool thing about this, by the way, it's considered extremely dodgy research area at the time because gambling was immoral. So when people studied gambling, particularly in the century before that, it was considered a very, it was a sort of shameful thing to study. So this is maybe one reason why probability took so long to take off. There you go. Thanks very much to religion for hiding probability from us for so long. So in this example, what Bayes said is we're going to have a ball, and we're going to, it's like on a billiards table. So people used to bet on billiards too, I think. So, or bar billiards, various types of billiards. So billiards is this game where you sort of have a table and you have a cue or something like this. But there's various games you can play on the table. So Bayes wasn't very imaginative. Well, he was very imaginative. But the game he came up with is you have a ball and you sort of knock it onto the table side by side such that it comes to rest at a position uniformly distributed from either side to the other. So you put the ball in and it will come and it will rest here. Yeah, perhaps. Now you get a second ball and you put the second ball in, the same thing, same trick, and it comes to rest here. And his idea for the distribution was that the parameter of the distribution is given by this line, and the outcome is, if it's to the right, it's yes, and if it's to the left, it's no. Make sense? So this is a different formulation of the distribution. But the parameter is given by where the black ball lands. So is the parameter of this distribution, is it aleatoric or epistemic? So people would say that's aleatoric. Those that sort of have, if you have a separation between the two, that would be considered aleatoric. In fact, the sampling mechanism for this object here is the same as the sampling mechanism in some way, the way he set it up for this object here. So this is an aleatoric uncertainty. And that's what Fisher didn't like. Fisher didn't like that in the paper, and that's why Fisher called it Bayesian. And you know, I think he had very good reasons, Fisher, but they're not reasons that are really so relevant today. They were relevant for his time. And that's why it's Bayesian, because Bayes introduced the Bernoulli distribution in this way, in such a way that the parameter of the distribution had aleatoric uncertainty associated with it. If you look at the Bernoulli way, there's this fixed proportion of balls, that's definitely epistemic uncertainty, and this is aleatoric. That's what it means to be Bayesian, not using Bayes' rule. If you if you avoid the use of Bayes' rule, or otherwise known as the product rule of probability, you're not being non-Bayesian, you're just being silly. Okay. So let's look briefly at maximum likelihood in the Bernoulli. It's very simple, but it comes out in quite a neat way. So if we do maximum likelihood, we minimize the negative log likelihood. Because of the form of the Bernoulli distribution, which was pi to the y, if we've got independence assumptions across it, we just get those sums coming out across a vector y. So we're now looking at a vector y. And then we just get a sort of log pi to the yi, but that allows the yi to come around the front of the first term. The next term is in a product. Everything's negative because it's negative log likelihood. And we get the other term taking this form. Now, if you do the gradient of that, because the gradient of the log is 1 over the log, well, 1 over the argument of the log, you get this. And then here, you get positive because the gradient with respect to pi, there's a negative term here. So that's the gradient. What we do next to get the maximum likelihood solution is we can look for a fixed point solution. So if we look for a fixed point solution, this is our thing. This is where the gradient will be 0. And then we can rearrange this to form something that looks like this. And then we can rearrange that to form something that looks like this. So this is now, we collected the pi together. We've managed to get all the pi's together by sort of multiplying that out and bringing that onto this side. That gives us a pi there, gives us a sum of yi on this side. Now we obviously just divide that into that, and that complex formula is going to come up with something rather simple. So you're going to be looking at this in the lab class in a bit more detail. We recognize that that sum on the right is the sum of all the negative class plus the sum of all the positive class. This is 1 if the class is 0, and 1 if the class is 1. So the total sum, that's n. So the end result is number of times it occurred positively divided by the total. That's an awful lot of work, it seems, isn't it, to come out with that the right estimate for the probability is the proportion of the times the result was positive divided by the number of times you tried it. that's actually the frequentist definition of probability, isn't it? I mean, it's not the Bayesian definition, but it's the frequentist definition of probability. But it comes out of the maximum likelihood. The reason we do it that way is not because we want to kill you or whatever. It's because there are occasions, like next week's model, where it's not obvious, this solution. This solution is intuitive and obvious in this case, but it's not obvious in general. So I think I ask you to prove that that's a minima for... So what's the best guess of probability of a coin being heads? If you do 100 tosses and get 47 heads, your best guess is 47 over 100. And this is the sort of thing that Laplace studied about whether that could mean that a coin was English, he'd call it. So a biased dice was an English dice in France. I'm sure in England we call them French dice. But then this question is like, how many tosses do you have to do to tell whether a dice, I mean, he used a coin, he talked about an English dice, but then talked about a coin because it's the same type of problem. How many tosses do you need to do before you can determine whether a coin is biased? And actually that's the sort of, the statistics is obsessed with this distribution and these sort of proofs, quite rightly, because they're very useful. Okay, so... But naive Bayes classifiers, we do something quite different. So what we do instead of trying to do the prediction function, what we're going to do is place probability distributions, and I've had to introduce the discrete distribution, over all the variables of interest. So in the naive Bayes classifier, instead of just having a prediction function and an output function, we're just going to derive an algorithm based on making assumptions about what the distributions are. And we're going to form a classification algorithm by modeling sort of the joint density of all observations, x and y. But in order to do that, we need to make some assumptions about the joint density. So we're very much going to use these sort of Bayes rules. So this is what I like. This is what I think machine learning is all about. This formula here. We are given a training set of x's and y's. That's the matrix of training inputs. That's the vector of training labels. And we want to make, this is generally always true, this is the best thing you can do. And then you're given a test location, x star. And you want to predict the test label, given everything you've seen before. That summarizes exactly, from the probabilistic perspective, what machine learning people need to do. But the problem for this is a complex... Well, if we were to model this, we would need to model things like the joint distribution of all y's and all x's. And this is quite a complex object to model, because the number of possible combinations for this vector y, so we've looked at the Bernoulli. The Bernoulli is a simple distribution. We're going to simplify things here. But there's 2 to the n possible combinations for this vector y. And you have to specify a probability for each of those 2 to the n combinations given x. So that's quite nasty. What we're going to do next time is use functions for doing that. But what we're going to do this time is make assumptions about that joint density. And that's what naive Bayes is really about. So what we can do is we can build a joint density. That's our belief about the world, probabilistically. And then we use that and the rules of probability to construct this thing which answers the question we're interested in. This is sometimes known as the generative approach to machine learning. It's the approach I generally take. It's not always the best approach to take. People often won't take this for some very good reasons. But I think it's a fun approach because you do a lot of stuff with the modeling. The generative approach means that once you've built this joint density, you can kind of ask anything about the density. You could ask, what's the probability of x star given y star, right? Which would not be a classification anymore. That would be something else. But you can ask all these questions. That's the advantage of the generative approach. The disadvantage is you're doing a lot more modeling. If you don't want to answer that question, why are you modeling the answer to that question? Well, so naive Bayes does model the answer to that question. So we need these characteristics. We need to be able to model 2 to the n possible combinations for the vector y. And we need to be able to extend the density for any new data point. So extending the density, right, we're modeling in training, we've got y and x, so we can model the joint distribution of y and x, but we need to be able to say something about how we deal with a new y star and x star when that comes along. And the assumptions under naive Bayes, there's sort of 3 key assumptions, 2 of which are, well, this one here is classical and used all the time. The marginal density is not particularly strange. This is known as the naive Bayes assumption. And we're just going to briefly at the end, we'll just go through each of those assumptions and what they mean. The maths about what it leads to is in the lab class. So data conditional independence. So what we've got is we want to model all our data, P of y and x, in this sort of framework, this generative framework. But as I say, we have to constrain the distributions we're using because there's 2 to the n possibilities for y. So that would mean having to specify for every x we get in, however, and there's infinite possibilities for x, what the right answer would be for these 2 to the n possibilities given y. So these assumptions reduce the amount that we have to specify. So this first one, data conditional independence, is just the one that you keep seeing again and again. It's just assume that the data points are conditionally independent given the parameters. Okay? We keep seeing that, right? We say every time, we say, oh, well, we're going to assume independence across the data points. That's the IID assumption. This one is sort of specific to the naive Bayes, feature conditional independence. And what that tells us is that we believe our model for the features is conditionally independent given the label. That's the naive Bayes assumption. These are all assumptions you make in naive Bayes, but this is like, these 2 assumptions here are just Bayes classifier general assumptions. You can read about that in Rogers and Girolami, the Bayes classifier. So what do they entail in practice? Well, the data conditional independence, this is actually how we always introduce x star and y star. We keep doing this. This is how we extend our probability distribution over x star and y star. We say that there's some fixed set of parameters that is true for everything, and then we assume independence across our test data point and all our training data. Yeah? I mean, we often aren't showing that, but that's what we're implicitly doing because we then use those parameters for predicting at the test point. So this is data conditional independence. It's an assumption that this joint distribution over everything we're interested in factorizes over all the data points. Yeah? And we keep seeing that. That's an IID assumption, actually. Feature conditional independence. So that assumption is also used in the Bayes classifier. This is the unusual one. So what we're going to do is we'll assume the conditional distribution of a data point, given its label, factorizes across the features. So this is an additional factorization. It's in a different direction. So it's across these P features of the model right now, right? So it's this probability distribution, which is a joint distribution over x, conditioned on the label and any parameters you have in your model, is given by a factorization over the P variables. So this xij is the ith data observation and the jth feature observation of the matrix. Yeah? The beautiful thing about this is it's a fully probabilistic model. So if this is missing, you can integrate it out. You can do all sorts of clever things. But it's a really strong assumption, right? It's saying that if I know whether you're male or female, your height and your weight are independent. I'm not sure that's true. It isn't true, right? So that is a strong assumption. But it's a really nice assumption because everything becomes really trivial once you've made this assumption. Well, you need one final assumption because what you assume here, we've got the joint distribution of y and x. And what I'm showing you next is the conditional distribution. This is the sort of Bayes classifier. In Bayes classifiers, you make an assumption about the features given your label. Yeah, this is a Bayes classifier assumption that you need to do that. Here in the naive Bayes, we assume independence. But that's not the joint distribution over an x and y. We need a final assumption, which is what the marginal distribution over y. So our final assumption is we need to also combine this with a marginal to get that joint that was in that data conditional independence assumption. And we just assume that that's the Bernoulli distribution I introduced in the first place. So this P of y is actually can be thought of as a prior, as in Bayes' rule. This is the prior distribution over the class label before you observe any data. So in Bayes' rule, that's called the prior. In Bayes' rule, this would be the likelihood, the probability of any given feature given the label. And what we use, what you'll see in the lab, and there's lectures, slides on it next, is you compute the posterior distribution of the label given the features. Yeah, so it's a use of Bayes' rule, but it's different from the use of Bayes' rule we did for Bayesian regression. And it's one that, because it's all frequentist, no one has any philosophical issues. People accept that Y has aleatoric uncertainty associated with it. And your P of Y here is your prior, before you observe your data, like of whether it's going to be male or female. So you don't observe anything. Someone walks into the room, you know nothing. Your prior belief is 50-50, they're male or female, something like that, yeah? And then, like, I don't know, you hear their voice and it's quite high pitch. OK, now you update your belief and you assume that they're female because the voice was high pitch. You don't know, but that's what your model says. And this object here would tell you the probability of the pitch of the voice given that they're female. That's what you model in the naive Bayes case. The fact that you're modeling that and you're modeling it independently per feature means it's incredibly fast to compute naive Bayes solutions. The fact that you're making this very, very strong assumption that the features of the thing you're looking at are independent given the class label means that it's not often the best performing classifier. But it's like, if you're a practitioner of machine learning, it's probably something you should always try. What's the naive Bayes result? There's some, I mean, we're not teaching nearest neighbors classifiers. They're sort of the obvious thing. You measure a distance between yourself and your neighbors, and you classify yourself according to who you're closest to. It's a very sensible thing. But if you're ever doing any classification in practice, doing naive Bayes and nearest neighbors as baseline classifiers is extremely sensible. Nearest neighbors can be quite expensive to compute, because computing your neighbors across the entire training set, if it's a large training set, can be very hard. Naive Bayes is always cheap to compute. So what remains is that you need to define this probability distribution. Everything else now in the model is defined. You compute the posterior of Y given X given Bayes' rule. The notes are there showing you how to do that for the lab class today. But you need to make an assumption about this. In the lab class, I think we've got two assumptions. One assumption is Gaussian, that for one class, you know, if it's a continuous variable. And the other one we use is another Bernoulli distribution. And what you'll see in class is we look at actually a mixed model, I think, over the movie body count data. And we do some classification over the movie body count data. And we just take in the data itself. And for the discrete columns, we use a Bernoulli distribution. For the continuous columns, we use a Gaussian distribution. And then you'll do classification on that data. And you'll see the math is like complex, but actually it's complex to try and show you how it relates to an overall framework, this joint model framework. This thing that I like to say is what we're always trying to do, which is in supervised learning, we're always trying to predict Y star, our label, given our training data, X and Y, and the input location for the test data. In supervised learning, it's even simpler. Just trying to do that. Conditional probabilities. Now what you'll see is given these assumptions, as you write everything out, naive Bayes becomes quite simple. But it takes a, you know, in some sense an unnecessary amount of time. I could introduce this model in another way. But I really want you to know that that's our goal. Probabilistically, that's our goal. But it's just an impossible goal without assumptions. So you see naive Bayes as a load of strong assumptions about the form of this joint distribution. Yeah? It's a generative model. Everything else we've done so far directly tries to model this. Yeah? So that's sometimes called a discriminative model. You're modeling the conditional distribution directly. Naive Bayes is a generative model. This means you can deal with all sorts of things, missing data, all sorts. Semi-supervised learning doesn't work that well, though, because it's not a great model. You know, it's such strong assumptions. But it helps to see it within the context of the model. Next week, we're going to do logistic regression, which is back to this sort of thing, modeling this directly. Naive Bayes is a fun departure in classification, because A, it's something you should always run if you're a practitioner on data, particularly for large data, and B, I can sort of frame it within this generative framework, because that's what it is, and sort of show you how you start generative but make strong assumptions about the underlying model. Okay, so I'll see you at some, well, let's take time for quick questions. Normally they're sort of queuing outside. Are they all queuing outside? Even at 10:02? No? Long questions? So questions, general questions. We've always got the lab you can digest and sort of have a think about what we've been saying. Questions? No? Okay. Good. It's all easy then.